Welcome to Bread for the People. I'm Jim Serpico. Today's day. Welcome to Bread for the People. This is Jim Serpico. Do that again. Welcome to Bread for the Here with Bob Oswaks, founder of Bob's Well Bread. According to Travel Magazine, they say it's one of the top 15 amazing small-town bakeries in the U.S. Bob, it's good to see you, man. Thanks for doing this.
It's good to see you as well. Thanks for having me today.
It's been a number of years. We worked together when you were at Sony Pictures Television.
Correct. Yeah.
And I had an overall deal at Sony for about 8 years to develop television. What was your position at Sony?
When we were working together, I was president of worldwide marketing for Sony Pictures Television.
Right.
So I was responsible for, leading the teams that were marketing all of the TV shows that we produced.
Now we're going to leapfrog a little bit back and forth, but for context,
Yeah, sure.
We've got a lot of people who are into bread making that listen to this presently. Before we dive really deep into the bakery, give us like the thumbnail of what you guys are doing. I know a lot of people in the entertainment business who go up north and they talk about your bakery. They have no idea that I know you. They might not even have any idea about your background, but they talk about Bob's Well Bread. So it's one of the most well-known bakeries in the Los Angeles area. And what are you, about an hour and a half north of LA?
We're in Santa Barbara County. We have two bakeries now. One's in Ballard, California, and the other is in Los Alamos. They're both in the San Ynez Valley, 135 miles from LA. So, 2 hours or less from the heart of LA. If you're in the valley or, Westlake Village or someplace like that, it's even closer.
Now, when we were working together at Culver City, Los Angeles, and you were the president of worldwide marketing, were you baking bread?
Not really. It started while I was in LA and still working at Sony, that my wife and I put a wood-fired oven in our backyard. We lived in London for several years from 95 to 2000. And my wife really loved Jamie Oliver and his show.
Uh-huh.
And he had this great wood-fired oven in the backyard. So one year I had one built for her. And so I started off just doing pizza and, just things like that. And it morphed into bread once I left Sony. I was looking for something to do to keep my hands and my mind busy while I was waiting for headhunters to call back.
Yeah.
And
similar to me, I basically was frozen during the beginning of the pandemic without a lot of work. And any of the work I had was, in the house on the computer. And it wasn't a lot. So I also was looking for something to keep me busy and started studying bread making.
I got a copy of tartine bread from a friend of mine named Clark Staub, who owns a restaurant in Los Alamos called Full of Life Flatbread. And he gave me the book and he gave me some of his starter because I told him I was thinking about this. And just something about Chad Robertson's book, the way he writes the instructions and the formula, tells you how to make the starter, the photos, everything just clicked. So the first breads that I made from tartine were, as Nancy Silverton put it, textbook perfect. So I started making bread every day. So if it was early or late or humid or dry or hot or cold or whatever the variables were, how could I make it consistently? And that led me to going up north to the San Francisco Baking Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of 2 years, taking every course they offered in terms of ancient grains and sourdough and baguettes, viennoiserie, gluten-free, wood-fired, everything but cakes and things like that. I was really into just breads and pastry.
So when you went to San Francisco, were they classes that you could take over the weekend, or did you have to relocate and actually stay up there for months at a time?
I stayed up there for a week at a time, just about every quarter for 2 years.
And did you do that?
And they were week-long classes.
Did you know, like, I'm doing this with a plan? and the plan is to open a bakery somewhere, or were you just taking it one step at a time? I'm really interested in this and I'm going to learn everything I can about it.
I just had this sense, going back to when I left Sony,
Mhm.
one of the first calls that I'd gotten was from one of my mentors, Norman Lear, who
Oh,
just turned 100.
100 years old and probably the best writer ever in
Oh, yeah.
television and
And
still prolific.
yeah, completely. And, but we talked about it and he was like, how long you been doing this? And I said, 30 years. And how long have you been at Sony? And I said, about 12. And he said what he is famous for saying, which was over next, meaning, not only is life not about doing the same thing your whole life, but when something's over, it's over. Go on to the next thing. But, having just left a very big, cushy, high paying job, I wasn't quite ready to hear that it was over and next. And, the bread making was really keeping me busy while I was waiting for the calls. And then the headhunters would call back and they'd say, you've had this amazing career, but you're not going to get that job again. You're 50. And I was like, okay, thank you. It's like, it's hard to be told that your career as you knew it is really over. I was doing consulting. I was working with PBS and doing things for them.
All
And
right, before we do that, let's get back into the Sony so people understand what we're talking about here. You guys, while you were there, you were marketing Seinfeld, my show, Rescue Me,
correct.
The Shield.
The Shield, Damages with Glenn Close, Breaking Bad with Bryan Cranston,
You had some network shows too.
King of Queens, Seinfeld was syndication.
King of
You know,
Queens, 100 something episodes.
yeah, it was an enormous library of current as well as syndicated TV programs. And you got Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and Days of Our Lives, Young and Restless, the top game shows, the top soap operas. So that just, it was a robust job that was all consuming.
And you
As you,
guys were also pioneers of the scripted basic cable breakout hits. The Shield was one of the first ones.
yeah,
Sopranos was
yeah,
around maybe before that, but then the Shield was true basic cable, right?
exactly.
Sopranos was premium HBO. I think it was the Shield that was the first one,
Yeah,
and that
no,
was
that
on
was,
FX.
Zach and Jamie and Russ and Steve Moscow that led the way in working with the basic cable networks to start producing original dramas and comedies.
So yeah, it's got to be tough to hear from the consultants that it's not going to be so easy when you have that. But I think it's important for people to understand, especially when you're going down that track, that that is a possibility, especially when you're on the studio/network side. I'm more on the other side of the selling side to studios and networks. In a way, it's in my hands to continue to generate, but at the same time, it does get harder to generate, especially depending where you are and what you have going on at a certain time. It could get really difficult. There's a lot of people that sell one show in their lifetime and that's it. And then it's over next for them. So
Right.
I'm hanging in there. I'm still developing, selling, but I have to say I do love baking bread. So I haven't hit the over next point, but
Yeah,
at the same time, I kind of like doing both. And because my volume is a little less, I think of it as a project. The same way I thought about producing different series were projects. My bread business is a project. I manage myself. I
mhm,
manage my bread business as a client. And that's one of the things I like about it. I could put the time into our social media, our recipes, our farmers markets, staff, and then from there, what is the next step for us? We don't know as a bread bakery. We're figuring it out, but we're enjoying that ride because I think that's a big thing about life too, is it's okay to not know things and just love the journey and see where you end up.
agreed. Very much so. I never would have predicted 15 years ago that I'd have left LA, left the business, started a business that I'd never worked in my life. There's no bakeries in my family, and even operating now two cafes, two restaurants. I never in my younger years, college or high school, never worked at a restaurant. So it was really, a complete reinvention. They say necessity is the mother of invention. So yeah.
Were you bringing loaves of bread to friends before you were doing this professionally? And were people saying, this is just out of control, Bob? This is amazing.
Yeah, that's what was happening. That's what made me come to the realization that my over and next had come to me. I was giving the bread away. People were saying, this is the best bread I've ever eaten. And it's flour, water, and salt, as you know. That's it. Nothing else is in our breads. So it's just that one of those magical things where through the process of fermentation, those three basic ingredients become something wholly different from what you started with.
It's an amazing process. It really is. So you hand it out, people are giving you the confidence, and then you take it further, you go to San Francisco. Did you have a cafe when you first started Bob's Well Bread Bakery, or was it just a bread business?
Well, my what I did while I was going to San Francisco, over those 2 years, was I hired a guy out of UCLA who was a professor teaching entrepreneurialism. I hired him to help me develop a business plan and a business model. And over that same 2 years, we met every week.
Really?
And, so every week for 2 years, we'd sit for a few hours at Soho House in LA. And, every week he was giving me these assignments. You know, who's your customer? Where do they live? What is their income? How much do they spend on food? How much do they spend on eating out of the house? Where do they buy their bread? If they can't buy their bread at a bakery, where are they buying it? And what are they, it's like it was it was complete research based, trying to determine what the business was. And at the nearly 2 year mark, I was like, we've been doing these homework assignments for 2 years, and it would take me hours each week. And, after 2 years, we had this much stacked of paperwork. And I said, where's the business, plan though? And what it was, as we then started putting it together like a puzzle, these small little assignments every week became a narrative for what my business was going to be and where it was going to be, because I knew I didn't want to do this in LA. I was ready to go.
Okay, let's talk about that just a little bit more.
Yeah.
Why were you ready to go? Was it a
Um,
business decision, or was it just a feeling? I mean, I'm gonna guess because I feel the same way. It's such an entertainment business driven town, especially if you were in the business. That's what you feel about it.
right.
And when it's over next, it's hard to just be in it and look at it every day and not be in it.
Exactly. As well as take that, which is my personal journey, and then and say, I want to do this business, but I want it to be unique. And and we'd had a house that we bought from a, Seinfeld bonus years, in the early part of 2000 up in the San Ynez Valley. And I knew how much I loved it, but I also knew how I wanted to be part of this artisanal community: winemakers, farmers, craft beer makers, cheese makers, local fishermen. When you make something artisanal with your hands, there's a magic to it, as you know. And it doesn't change the way the product tastes, but it changes the experience of the person who's getting it.
Mhm.
And that's what people want. So when they come into my bakery and they can see my bakers loading and unloading bread from the oven, rolling croissants on the table, shaping the bread. It's part of the experience they take away with them. So I knew I wanted to get out of LA because LA being this industry town, it also wasn't a carb town. It
Mm,
as much as it is today. Go back 12 years ago, there weren't, other than La Brea Bakery, which was Nancy Silverton's, there weren't a lot of bakeries. Now you've got many more.
right.
But then I was just like, I want to do this someplace where I can create something of my own in an artisanal community.
I would also think, having the executives that you worked with come in there. I mean, they probably still do, by the way, up in Santa Barbara, because I know there's a lot of people that go up there. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's something about starting fresh. I do. It's a little easier for me to do that out here in Long Island because it is not Hollywood. It's not entertainment driven. By and large, my customers have nothing to do with show business. Coincidentally,
Exactly.
they might, but if they do, it's like some other part of it. And we bake out of a deli and really just service farm stands and farmers markets. And when we first started out, we were delivering to homes, and we still do that, although we just stopped for the rest of the summer because our schedule doesn't allow it with all that's going on. But we'll probably pick that up again. And I haven't done that business plan. That's why I'm really intrigued by, you know, that exercise that you went through.
Oh yeah.
I'm also curious how much like did the rent go into it when you guys were doing the thing about your customers and all that? Did it also, what are your operating expenses? Did you spend time on that? And did you discover that there are cheaper places than Beverly Hills to operate out of?
I didn't have any other plan other than to do it in the San Ynez Valley. That was my only plan. But the business model did take all that into account, um, and I'm happy to share it with you so you can see
Oh, I
what
appreciate that.
into that. But
You in
it was
terms of the model, like, because we think about these things, where we live in Long Island, it's almost like doing it in Manhattan, maybe not quite, but at the same time, where the people who like to spend money on food and have discretionary income, the rent is so expensive. Whereas if we went to North Carolina or somewhere else, it might be cheaper to do something. And then you think about, well, do you rent in a strip mall or do you buy? Right. And because that's part of the investment too.
what we did was we bought this little town of Los Alamos has a, under 1,500 people. It's right off the freeway, and the town is 7 blocks long. And I just had this, and everybody told me not to do it. You know,
Why?
local.
What would the reasons be?
Would people come? Would they keep coming back? Because you're selling bread. It's got to be. You got how many days a week do you buy a loaf of bread? Some people. The business model development really informed what the business was going to be. And the business was always going to be a bakery and a cafe. Because if you get someone that's coming in to buy a loaf of bread or a croissant, but they sit down and they have a breakfast sandwich on your bread or
Mhm.
your English muffin that you make, or they have a gravlax on one of your bagels, you up your guest check average and you start to make more money.
Sure.
The business model had 3 tiers. There was wholesale, which was going to be 50% of my business. Then there was the retail bread sales and cafe. Once we opened, and relatively quickly, like within the first month,
Mhm.
it was really clear to me that the retail and the cafe sales, instead of being 50% of what I needed, they were over 100%. So the necessity to build up this wholesale business where you have to work twice as hard to make half the money wasn't as necessary. So what my wholesale became was who gets what we do, what restaurants get what we do, appreciate it in a way that they'll pay a premium for it. They'll put me on the menu, and it'll help enhance my brand.
Yeah, I have one restaurant account and I do the same thing.
Yeah.
It says that it's side hustle bread.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's great because then people come in for it.
Right.
And it's so I'm really at a very select group of, places. And, that's the way it's always been for the last 8 years.
But you don't have to coordinate delivery trucks.
Well, I do have a van, and before we opened the second location, and before COVID, we were delivering to all of our accounts, but they were only in our geographical area. They were only in the valley, so I wasn't driving to Santa Barbara or San Luis Obispo. We're staying in a 15-mile radius. Early on, very early on, Whole Foods discovered us. This is in the first 6 months. And they wanted to sell the bread. This was Whole Foods in Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo. So they're, about 45 miles in either direction from where we were. And we went through the ringer with Whole Foods of what we had to do to be on their vendor list, what I had to do with the health department, how I had to deliver, the timing, what they wanted, what they would pay. And we did it. And it was a nightmare. And it wasn't making me any money. And they thought they were enhancing my brand, but my brand was building itself at this point. So we stopped that. So, and what happened during COVID.
You actually tried it?
Oh, we did it for about 4 or 5 months.
Driving you mad.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? We're not making any money. It's not helping the brand.
Right. So we just continued to do our small wholesale business and our retail and cafe business. That's the way it's always been. Prior to COVID, we were delivering to all of our accounts. What happened during COVID was initially, because all the restaurants were going through what we were going through, they stopped their orders entirely. And so we had to figure out, how do we keep our business? How do we adapt? How do we pivot what we're doing? So we started a delivery business of delivering free to anybody that wanted our bread in our community, in the San Ynez Valley. And then we started doing deliveries to Santa Barbara, Montecito, Goleta, and Los Angeles. And we would just tell people where we were going to be and how they could find us. And orders started coming in right away.
You got a drop-off location.
Yeah. In one of each of those locations. So the ability to do that kind of pivot is what kept us afloat during those early months of COVID where everything was so uncertain. And then eventually we were allowed to, serve to go so people could pick up food. They could pick up bread. And, by May of 20, things were back. Like by Mother's Day of 2020, we were back to where we were. And by the end of 2020, we were even with 2019, which was our best year ever. By 21, and we were getting ready to open our second location in the last quarter of 21. 21 became our best year, and 22 is on target. The growth trajectory has never flattened. It's always gone up.
Are you still doing the deliveries and the drop-offs in Los Angeles and those other places?
No, we stopped that when business started resuming. We couldn't do it. But even for our wholesale deliveries, when they all came back, I said, look, I've got 2 locations. You can pick up your breads at our Los Alamos location or our Ballard location, but I can no longer be driving around all morning delivering to you. And I didn't lose anybody.
So the plan, going back to the business plan, did it map out how to run a cafe? Because that's also, that's very different than running numbers. You don't have experience in restaurants or cafe management.
Right.
how to lay it out, how to design it. It sounds from what you're saying, I'm assuming you have an open kitchen plan so people could see what's going on. How do you come up with that?
Yeah. So the business plan included all of that. There
Really?
was, sessions and assignments on what does it all look like and how many people do you need? What are the shifts looking like? How many baristas, how many servers, how many bakers, how many line cooks, how many prep people, how many dishwashers, and what shifts do they work and how much money do
All
they
right,
make?
question here. So you guys are meeting at the Soho House, and he says your assignment this week is, we want to figure out what this is going to look like. I guess you could, like a movie or a TV show, you start doing research for context and you put together storyboards of comparisons.
Yeah.
But then what? Like, do you then hire an architect to help you right then at that point?
Well, okay, so let's back up a little bit. While I was attending San Francisco Baking Institute, it's owned by a French baker named Michel Suas, and he's written one of the preeminent books on bread and pastry called, I'm looking on my bookshelf right here, Advanced Bread and Pastry. It's about this thick. Over the course of the years that I was taking the classes there, Michel and I got closer, and he realized that I wasn't just this, hobbyist, that I was serious and that I really wanted to open a bakery. And, we sat down one day and he said, here's what I'll do. Because he'd consulted with Chad Robertson when he was building Tartine. He consulted with Nancy Silverton when she was taking La Brea Bakery from being in-house within Campanile in Los Angeles to having this big production facility. So he said, look, this is what I can do. As well as owning the baking school, Baking Institute, he owns a company called TMB, which is a bakery equipment sales and manufacturing business. So
Okay.
he said, I will design the bakery for you at no charge as long as you buy all the equipment from me. And I've been looking at ovens like Pavayer and different kinds of ovens that I thought would provide the kind of bread I was looking to make. But most of these distributors were East Coast based. But I wanted somebody that was on the West Coast because things go wrong, things get broken. You need to, I can be in San Francisco in 3.5 hours to pick up a new window for my deck oven because the dishwasher dropped it in the sink, which has happened numerous times. We did that arrangement and he designed it based on, at the time, what my business model was saying I was going to do. How much bread am I going to produce? And, there's a logic to the design of a bakery just for ergonomics and ease and for how does the business, of making bread work? Where's your mixer in relation to where your sink is, in relation to where your bench tables are, in relationship to where is your proofing being done, and where's your oven, and what's the flow look like of your kitchen, your line for your kitchen work. So, we did that together, and I layered that in with my architects whom I hired to help me design the building. And, how do we, where are we getting our permits from and all those things. So it was a team of people, the contractor, the architect, and the bakery design that all worked together to create that.
And what period of time? The business plan was 2 years, permits and all the rest of the stuff we're talking about from beginning to end. How long did it take to ultimately open? From the day you started the business plan to the day the doors open.
I started the business plan in 2011. The business opened in 2014. I had to convince my wife Jane that we were going to leave LA. We're going to move up to the Central Coast and do this. And her first reaction was, what do you know about running this kind of a business? What do you know about running a bakery? What do you know about running a restaurant? It's like, it was all these questions that she was right to ask. But ultimately, we made a deal, and she get to choose the house, and she go along. So, so we moved up on Memorial Day of 2012. So just about 2 years prior to open. First thing that we were doing, because I was still working on the business model and the business plan, and I was still going to San Francisco. But the first thing that we did was identify the building that we were going to buy. And, I hired an attorney who helped me with all of that. And once we owned the building, we could then start working with the architects and Michelle to say, this is the space, here's the as-built of, what the space is and the land. And we could start that whole process. So I think we closed on the property in July of 2013, and we opened 13 months later, August 1st of 2014. We started construction on Valentine's Day of 14, so 6 months from beginning of construction to the day we opened the doors.
I'm familiar with these electric deck ovens.
This is gas.
You have gas,
Right.
okay.
I did have 3-phase electric, and the county had advised me that it would probably cost $75,000 to bring 3-phase electric to where we were. And it just became, and also with a electric deck oven, you can adjust each deck to a different temperature. With a gas oven, everything's all the same. But I just realized that gas was the way we were going to go.
Okay. But where I was going is it's a little bit different. It's probably more of a consistent bake, but still getting familiar with the workflow. Having not done that before, and that tied into training other people that you haven't worked with.
Right.
And how do you find these people, and what experience did they have? It's a whole lot of questions in one, but I'm assuming you went through some kind of dress rehearsals for a month before or 2 months before.
At least a month before, because the ovens got in early July. The oven was shipped over from Italy. It's an Italian, and they had to send somebody over from Italy to assemble it all. It was a whole process, because these ovens, they're $100,000. They come in their own container, and it's not like you're buying a Magic Chef and it just loads in. It's hundreds, if not thousands, of individual pieces. So it took several weeks to assemble the oven. The other part of your question was finding people. I started running ads on Craigslist and other sites and looking for bakers. And I knew that I needed probably a head baker that was going to be someone that's done this before, because I haven't. And I did hire somebody that was a really bad hire very early on in the business. And the business was open and running, but the guy was just not a good person. And I had to cut him loose and find a new head baker right away. That led me to hiring a headhunting firm that specializes in the restaurant industry. And they helped me find my next head baker, who I gotten from a bakery down in San Diego, came up, spent a couple of days with us, and decided he, was into it, and stayed with me for the next, I think, about 4 years. Wanted to move on. And this same headhunter found me my next head baker, also interestingly from San Diego, different bakeries though. And he's been with me ever since. And, he's been a true partner to me, to helping me grow the business.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
When did you open the second location?
Second location opened just about 2 years ago, October 1st October 1st of 20. It was right in the middle of, the pandemic. But we had a couple of years before committed to it, and we knew that the landlord was a friend up there. Said, I'm buying this classic old building in Ballard, and it's too big for what he and his wife have a Pilates studio. They were moving the Pilates studio in there. Said, it's too big for just a studio. Would you consider opening a second location in Ballard? And during this several years we've been open at that point, 5 years probably, the business had been really successful, to the point that on any given day, and especially on the weekends and holidays, there was a line that would go out the door, down the sidewalk, into the street. And it would be that way for hours, from 7 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. And what happened was, because we were a local business, but because we were right off the freeway and in a tourist town, the business became very popular with the tourism community. When the locals would come by and they'd see that line, that's like, forget it, I'm not waiting. So I wasn't losing business, I was just losing the business of the people that I wanted. So I felt that if we opened in Ballard, which is it's sort of like the nexus of the valley, the community that we're in, that I would be able to bring back the locals, which is exactly what it's become. The Ballard location is a locals destination, and the Los Alamos one is a tourist destination. Los Alamos never lost, and there was never a blip. It didn't lose 1 cent of business, and Ballard just became additive.
Got it. But you're renting in Ballard.
Ballard, I'm renting. Los Alamos, I own.
And you're producing out of Ballard as well.
No.
So it's a kiosk almost.
Well, it's a second location. That what happens, because think about it this way: you've got ovens that you're only using for 1 shift. So you're using your ovens. When it was only Los Alamos, we started baking at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We opened at 7. So those 4 hours from 3 to 7, we were baking all the baguettes, all the bagels, all the English muffins, all the levain loaves, all the specialty loaves, all the wholesale, everything, and all the pastries and everything. Everything came out in that 4-hour span. We had to now opening a second location, knowing that we still had 2 shifts in the day we weren't using. We had to come up with a way to we had to work backwards, and all right, we're opening in this time in the morning. What time do we have to start to get out twice the product? So we determined that we really need to start at like 9, 10 o'clock at night, and that's what happens now. Bakers come in at 10 o'clock, and they work on all the bread and they work on all the pastry, and then about 5 o'clock in the morning they start separating everything out. What goes to Ballard, what stays in Los Alamos, where's our wholesale packaging going on, and they start packing everything up into crates, and it all gets loaded into the delivery van, which gets to Ballard at about 6 or 6:30 in the morning. Ballard opens at 8. So we have an hour and a half to unpack and set everything into the speed racks and set the pastry case. Ideally, if I could get one of these old step vans, looks like a UPS or
I love those. I've been looking at them.
If I could get a step van, I could just roll my speed racks in, attach them to the back of to the wall somehow, cover them so they don't slide, and then I could save an hour every morning of packing and unpacking and repacking and setting. But I haven't identified it yet.
Well, if anyone out there has a step van near Los Alamos, California,
County area,
please get in touch with Bob, or you could get in touch with me and I'll send you right over to Bob.
Exactly.
Are you still hands-on at baking? Are you hitting the overnight shift? You doing as much baking? No.
I just, once we opened the second location, there just wasn't, I didn't want that. I didn't get into this to start, to work the graveyard shift myself. I didn't mind, I get up super early, so I didn't mind being there at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And, my bakers would start on some of the bread and I'd get in there. I do the signature loaves that have our logo on it. I would do the baguettes. I would do the bagels, things like that. But once we opened the second one, and second one is literally 2 minutes from my house, I spend more time there.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the story. Two questions. What came first, the tattoo or the logo?
The logo came first. Logo was designed by Tom Nicole, who, when I worked at Sony,
Okay.
he was my creative director. Did all the packaging and designs for Rescue Me and all of our other shows. Did logos, and he'd also left Sony at this point. And I explained to him I was trying to come up with a logo, and we got together and we worked on coming up with what the actual logo for the bakery is. And we had the logo and the name, but I said, I need something. I need an icon.
Yeah.
So something that is going to go on merch. It's going to go on our sweatshirts. I'm going to stencil on the bread. It's going to go on our wine glasses, our coffee mugs, and things like that. And as it turns out, the logo is this bread fork that was my great grandmother's, that she brought over from Russia as part of her flatware pattern in 1900.
Wow.
And a bread fork was used to serve yourself a piece of bread or a dinner roll when the platter came around the table to you. It was, I guess, before tongs or another way of doing it. So we came up with this stylized version of the bread fork, and we put it on everything so that it becomes a distinguishing, identifying mark for us.
It's amazing.
And then
Great
on
logo.
our first anniversary of the business, I put it on my arm, and I knew we were going to make it at that point, so I didn't have a concern.
I did the same thing. I have a tattoo on my calf of my production company logo, which to me symbolized a new start in that realm. Lastly, a bit of advice, not just for bakers, but for young people who, are starting out in life. Maybe they're in college, just post college, not 100% sure what they're going to do. You've done a lot in your life. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts of wisdom that you could pass on.
Well, thoughts of wisdom is that find something you're passionate about, because that passion will go a long way towards your own personal happiness and hopefully your success. They say find a job you love and you never work a day in your life. It's not true, because it is hard work, as you know. Early mornings, late nights, things break. There's nothing like the sense of accomplishment when a customer tells you how much they love what you do. I didn't get that at Sony a lot, but you get it when you're feeding people.
Wait a second. Are you saying that Zach and Jamie never came up to you and said, "Hey, Bob, I love what you do"?
No. Zach and Jamie were great, but there was just not that same level of appreciation.
But you don't regret doing the Sony thing either. Like
No,
that was,
my early life. When I went to Adelphi University on Long Island,
yeah.
and I studied marketing. All I wanted to do was work in the entertainment business. So 1980, graduated from college, moved to California, drove my Triumph Spitfire across country, and set out to work in the business, and I did.
Yeah.
For 30 years.
Right.
I don't regret it. It just, as Norman said, over it next. I found something else I was passionate about. And I think younger people today, they may think that they have to get an executive job, or they have to be a producer, or they have to, run
a corporation or something. But going back to roots of doing something with your hands or doing something more trade oriented, there's no shame in that at all. You can make I have a very nice life and I do something that I didn't think I would ever be doing in my life.
Bob, it was amazing to catch up. I can't
Thank
wait to visit when I'm out there. My middle son, Cole, lives in Los Angeles full time. He's starting his entertainment career
Okay,
at Anonymous Content.
sure.
He just graduated school from Los Angeles. So I'll be out there quite often, and I will 100% come up and see you.
Okay, we'll put you on the table. You can do some shaping.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, man. This is so great. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the time.
You got it. Bye-bye. This episode was produced by Miles. This episode was edited by Brock Higley. His real name, you know that? He's going to edit it. He's going to hear this? I fucking love that. He sounds like an action star or something. If you have an idea for an episode or a bread adjacent story, send me an email at breadforthepeoplepod@gmail.com.